Yeah, man, I can only talk about the shifts in perspective that happened for me this week. And one of them was around something as simple as how dogs and humans, their styles of like how we greet each other is so different. And this all came up because, we're taking this class on bringing a baby home when you have a dog around. And it was like one of the first things the instructor said was just think about it. When you're a human and you go to greet another human, what do? You like stand straight, you point your toes at them, you look in eye to eye contact, you might have a smile on your face.
Yeah.
Like there are these normal human ways to greet each other. Now, think about exactly what you just said. And if a dog was doing that to another dog or to a baby or even to a human, right? Like you're not really supposed to be looking at, you're not really supposed to be making eye contact. You're not really,
right.
If a dog was pointed straight at you,
just standing there still, looking you in the eyes. Yeah.
So I don't know. For some reason, I was like, wow, look at that. Just the things that we do, we take for granted, like another animal is completely different behavior and it invites completely different reactions,
Yeah, totally. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Do dogs have do they connect with babies differently than adults? Was that talked about at all? Just give
Well, it's more
size
like,
differential.
There's a potential for jealousy. There's also a potential for like you as a parent, you're sleep deprived. There's a dog in the room, there's a baby in the room. Like you need to have full attention. Like you really don't want to have a dog around a baby, obviously. But then also just simple things like when they first interact, let the dog smell the bottom of the baby's feet and have those baby's feet covered as well. Like just simple things like that, right? Like you don't want to have the dog sniff. I didn't know like to sniff the bottom of your foot, like is the way to go with a baby. I probably would have just, knowing Buster, I would have probably been like, just sniff it, just sniff. And he would have sniffed. But I don't know. It's little things like that that just kind of get you prepared. And then also, if needed, just reminding your dog around like certain commands, sit, lay down, like get them to do it more quickly because there's going to be moments where they're going to need to do that to prevent a potentially bad situation, right? So just retraining them a little bit. Also training them on where like their success stations are. So like success stations are little areas that you've set up where when the baby arrives and there's all this activity, like the dog can go to that little success station, get a treat. And like some of that training needs to like happen now. And so anyway, but the bottom line, I was just like, things humans do that other animals don't do. And that even goes to like overthinking things or like, you go through a tough week, you make mistakes. It feels like everything you do is just another mistake. And then you ruminate on it, you like get through it and you like make peace and all that stuff. But I'm wondering, like, does another animal really think about stuff like that, right? Just all day long, just thinking about the mistakes they made and trying to dig themselves out of a hole all the time. Like, it's just interesting what we do.
No, it's fascinating, dude. I mean, they have their jobs too. They especially like wild animals. I was going for a walk on Marina Boulevard and there was a bird on like one of the like electrical posts, and I walked right by this thing, like with it truly came within like 2 or 3 feet of it, and it didn't move. And I was just staring at it like eye to eye. And I don't know, dude, I had that thought too. It's like, what is the experience of this bird right now? Because for me, the last 45 minutes, I've been walking around thinking about myself, as you said, like ruminating, all these abstract, like intellectualizations of life. And this bird is just like sitting here seemingly like content as can be. And, it has its own responsibilities. It's probably going to leave and find itself food for the night or find itself a nest, or build one itself. But Yeah, at the end of the day, we both got a brain and we both got a little heart in ourselves and eyes, and just crazy, man.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, what is the design? Why do humans, so many of us, right, just spend our days like just telling ourselves stories all day long? How many of us are
Mm.
just telling stories to ourselves? You know, but are other animals telling stories to themselves? Likely not. And then I wonder, for a species so advanced and doing so many incredible things and building so much and iterating, like, what is the advantage of having to feel like you're always digging out until you actually dig out, and then you're fine. But like, you know, in those moments where things are really tough, it's just, I don't know, it's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I also had that thought kind of on that line of thinking, how far in the future we are when you just look around. Like look around. I'm living in San Francisco right now. Looking around the city, everything's paved over. You got buildings stretching out, you know, 15, 20 stories into the sky, or even more so if you go downtown. Cars whizzing by, buses, you know, connected to these cables. Everyone's on their phones. We're born into this world, like the year we're born is kind of year zero, but we are so far into the future of like the human life cycle. And uh I to your point about digging out in life, sometimes feeling like a swirl of stories we're telling ourselves. Life is just, there's been all these layers that we've built on over the last 10,000 years, and I feel like we're at the tip of something now. And um it's just no wonder that there's a certain level of stress that comes with modern life, because we've just built ourselves so far out of nature.
Right. In other words, what if I'm understanding that, I would say that our human brain is still a human brain, but the
Mm,
amount of tabs that are open
yeah.
or the amount of things that are going on is so advanced. So you said that you feel like we're at the tip of something or right at the brink of something, and maybe we're at the brink of like the next step of evolution is, are you able to transform your human brain, which is designed to do a few things really well, and then now make it a brain that can do many things, hopefully well.
Mm,
Like, you know what
mm.
I mean? Like, I think it's the next level of how well can you be at multitasking with your, while still having a human brain,
Mm.
which is really not designed for multitasking.
Right,
I find
right.
myself making mistakes when I'm multitasking. I find myself that, you know, if I'm trying to do too many things or trying to connect too many dots and trying to keep up with too many things, maybe that's my weakness and that's what I need to learn and get better at. But, you know, it's still a human brain.
Yeah.
And
No,
then when
it's
that human
interesting.
brain, I'm sorry, one last thing. I was
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
say, and if that human brain doesn't get, you know, the right nutrition or isn't drinking water or isn't exercising, even a 48-hour stretch like that can be unhealthy, and it leads to more things like mistakes and just silly stuff, right? Like just simple stuff. Once you kind of crack, it becomes like compounding on itself until you just take a break from it, let your human brain like refresh, come back,
Hmm.
regenerate, like come back. And then from there, you can like advance and evolve and try to have like a better stretch moving forward.
Mm.
But I don't know. I think there's this element of like, how well can you multitask?
Yeah. And maybe that's what burnout is, getting to a point where there are too many tabs open and you just need to close the whole browser down, because it's just getting increasingly, like, life is only going to get more complicated, I think, in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ways. Technologically, life at work, like the amount of tabs that people will be expected to keep open is only going to increase. You know, I think there's been maybe more focus on like soft skills, and like if you can really just master these few simple skills, then you'll be fine at work. But in reality, when you actually have to apply that, I think the expectation is that you are able to multitask, and it's not just about the soft skills. It's really about mastering all these different things at once and keeping all these balls in the air. And yeah, it's only going to get more complicated from here. So I think you're right. I think like finding ways to eat what's on your plate, eat all of it and start over. However you do that, I don't even know if it's possible in certain roles, but like that's what's required just to get back to a baseline level of sanity so you can start all over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the biggest shift in perspective for you this week?
Well, the biggest shift in perspective for me came from the conversation we had with Jerry Colonna.
Mm.
Um, one of the things that really really became clear for me coming out of that conversation was how explaining the motivation behind your question can take you and the other person out of the realm of kabuki theater, which is something that we wrote the newsletter about. It can help each of you take off the mask and step out of your characters and just have a more real conversation. So with Jerry, the way that played out with me and him, I was asking him all these questions about his strategies as an executive coach, and he kind of stopped me and was like, well, what part of you is asking that question? And when I shared that I'm interested in the coaching space, I've been, interviewing at coaching companies, he was, that kind of got us out of the gray area, and he was able to answer that question kind of more honestly because he understood the why behind the question. And I think there's just a lot of power in that. I apply it mentally too to the process of interviewing. Sometimes you'll get a question from an interviewer, like, I don't know, let's say, like, tell me about the culture at your last company. And, they could be asking that question for any number of reasons. They could be asking that question because they want to see how your mind works and how it thinks about culture. They could be asking that question because, they want to like dig deeper into your experience. They could be asking that question because they want to see if you're a cultural fit for this company. So I think just pausing and being like, that's a great question. I'd love to answer it, but I'd love to know the reason why you're asking that question. It's very disarming. And like both of you can kind of step out of the character, and it gives you the opportunity to speak to what the person really would like to hear. So I think that, it's just getting to the why of the question helps you have such a more real conversation.
Yeah, I could see that going also. Like if you ask why or like try to get a motivation, that could go the wrong way as well. And I don't know. But
yeah.
Yeah, Jerry Colonna, that was definitely perspective shifting in terms of how he basically had you talk more about why did you ask him the question, right? And then we got down to some root stuff. And it makes you think about all the times, again, just kind of like going back to his questions around how am I complicit in the life that I've shaped, especially the things that I don't want, and like who am I, and like what does success mean, and all this stuff. And it's like, well, even those questions, like there's got to be a motivation, and sometimes the motivation is that you need to like change patterns. I think that's what I got from him. It's just change patterns, get to the root causes of thing, which at the end of the day, like even if you're in sales or something, like what are you trying to do? You're trying to get to the root cause. You're trying to get to the biggest pain point, trying to find the biggest challenge. And then sometimes you can get so in it that you need someone else to like shake you and recalibrate you so that you can refocus on actually what is the biggest challenge. So like you can there's layers to this around, you think you're working on something and then something happens or feedback happens and you realize that actually the biggest thing I need to be working on is something that may not have been on my radar. So you had mentioned like earlier, just balancing different types of skills and multitasking and being able to like handle different tabs open. It's like, yeah, EQ and soft skills are one thing, but operational skills, technical skills, those are two other components to the puzzle as well that need to be balanced. And we going back to like, we might be at a tip of something. It's like maybe again, just in terms of evolution as a human, balancing those three things. And there's probably many more that I'm not even thinking about. But EQ, operational, technical, like all that needs to happen. And you kind of have to like have a purpose and a why to even want to balance those three things.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of connects with the beginning of your comments around getting to like the underlying reason for something. And, we talked with Jerry, we kind of talked about it in the context of family life, and every family has their own rules, and maybe families aren't, or parents aren't always transparent around why those rules are in place. It's interesting because I don't think anyone likes to hear "because I told you so" as the answer for why a rule is in place. People feel so much better about it when they understand the rationale, whether that's in like a family dynamic or in work or even in like public policy. Like, people don't like "because I told you so." And I don't know. I guess maybe I'd to ask you, like, in a work environment, if there's a rule in place that doesn't make sense to you, in the kind of prevailing rationale is "because I told you so," do you think people are really in a place to like realistically ask for more? Or do you think that that's just going to rock the boat?
It, depending on how you do it, it could rock the boat. I think if you approach it with a maybe open, like a maybe mindset, like a open mindset, and you accept the, hey, I told you so. Again, it like, that's what I was trying to say. Like sometimes things happen, or like you have to go through an experience because it's used as like a recalibration of like what really is important, or what the thing that you need to be thinking about should be. So again, it kind of, maybe that's what you need to open up the perspective about how you're going about your own self. So that's how I would think about that at this point in my life.
Yeah.
Really depends on where you are in the journey. I think that question would get so many different answers. Like
Yeah,
if you
for
ask
sure,
someone.
dude. For sure. It's also contextual, and yeah, no, 100%, dude. Yeah, 100%. Well, one of the other things I wanted to bring up, shifts in perspective. I guess it's not so much a shift as much as it is a reaffirmation of something that we heard on Rising Laterally earlier in 2021. And that was from Thomas More around this idea of, when you're talking about human emotion or like human behavior or just psychological experience, it really helps to attach an image to this feeling of this emotion. Like, you concretize it with a visual, like you concretize it with a metaphor. And for me, that was validated by like Jerry's use of this term kabuki theater, which is this Japanese theater tradition where the performers are wearing these elaborate costumes and wearing like thick makeup, and they're taking on this really sort of exaggerated persona. And his whole idea is, if you want to be, step into a more authentic realm with someone, you step out of the realm of kabuki theater. And I feel like that has so much more weight as a visual than just saying "be authentic," or "be
Oh
real."
yeah.
Like, when I
Wow.
hear, like, it really made so much more sense to me when I could attach the image of that performer and imagine them wiping their face clean of the makeup. It just, I don't know, resonates with me on such a deeper level. And that's obviously, like, it's a metaphor that I'll carry with me going forward as a way of describing what it means to be authentic. But that also just confirms Thomas More's idea around the power of metaphor. And it makes me want to come up with new metaphors and discover new metaphors for things that we talk about as abstractions, because I think like the metaphor is what people will remember, and we can get through to people.
Dude, I want to be on that email list of the metaphors that you come up with, because that's so true. And that's so true. I mean, yeah, I mean, I will personally, it's like, yeah, I don't use enough imagery. And I think that's like, you're so right. Because even for me, that kabuki theater connection, it's clear. Clearer you can be,
Right.
the better, right?
Right. Exactly, man. Yeah,
Going back to
exactly.
like communication skills, right? Clearer, more concise, which is really interesting because I think this podcast has kind of got me away from that at times, where I kind of get like wordy and could be more concise. And so interesting because I feel like this podcast has taught me a lot of things, but then it also has kind of taken me away from some of the things that are required, like just right to the point kind of communication.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. It's definitely been an opportunity for us to wax poetic, and that doesn't always lend itself to different, different forums in life, like
But let's
work
think
on.
about some analogies
Yeah,
real quick. Like what other
yeah,
things are metaphors? So authentic was one. So it's like basically think of buzzwords,
yeah.
and then how would you describe those buzzwords?
Yeah, well, it's like, well, empathy is a big word, right? I don't have the metaphor in mind yet, but that's a word that we're hearing all the time. I feel like if someone could come up with a kabuki style metaphor for empathy, that could be pretty powerful.
I feel like it's you can ask someone, have you ever felt pain before?
Mm,
And it's just a
mm,
matter of like that question might invoke an imagery or a feeling where it's like, yes, I can put myself in your shoes now. We've all
mm-hmm,
felt pain before.
mm-hmm. Yeah, pain in a way is its own
But
imagery.
in
Yeah.
terms of like, yeah, it's like, have you ever had that pit in your stomach feeling?
Mm,
Or have you ever felt your heart drop?
mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Oh,
can put
yeah. I
myself in
have.
your
Yeah,
shoes.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Totally,
like
dude.
maybe questions as opposed to like it having to be like a kabuki theater.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And the thing that I like about that too is that those are all having to do with the body.
oh,
We're
it's
all
all
like
about the
live.
feeling.
Right. Yeah. Like we're all in this human experience together, and like asking, have you ever had your heart drop? That's a really, that's something that we've all physically experienced. And I feel like there's just a stronger connection to physical sensation than emotional sensation. It's like, have you ever been nervous? It's like, yeah, I've been nervous. It's like, have you ever been so nervous you had a pit in the bottom of your stomach? It's like, yeah, now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, connecting to the body, I
yeah,
think is pretty
yeah,
powerful.
yeah. You know that feeling when you hit the send button and you're like, oh my God, did I CC the wrong person?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly, dude. The other one that I have kind of latched onto too is just this archetype of the warrior. Um,
Mm,
I read this book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, which was about it was a Jungian book about four Jungian archetypes as he described them of the male psyche. And the thing about the warrior was, again, it's not just about a soldier or someone, engaged in combat. Really, the warrior is about this constellation of energies around like decisiveness and courage and adventure. And when I'm going into something that I'm nervous about, or it's new, I try to, instead of just quote unquote pump myself up, I try to like mentally get in the mindset of the warrior of like, be decisive, be like firm in your actions, like, lead with your sword, so to speak. And just in terms of metaphor, I find that to be a pretty powerful one for me when I'm dealing with nerves.
nice.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you say that, the warrior specifically, because going back to Jerry Colonna, he would say that like these, if you've gone through a tough time or whatever, and you're digging yourself out, these are the times when the warrior leader can emerge as well. So just trying to connect dots to recent conversations and the word warrior. Yeah. That's strong, because think about what a warrior has to do. Like, they have to show up. They have to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They can't hesitate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That, how do you strengthen trusting your instinct more as you get older?
Whoa, that's a great question. That's a great question, because it brings to mind times I haven't trusted my instinct when I probably should have. Um, I think it, hopefully, this isn't too simplistic of an answer, but I think it's actually trusting your instinct, running that experiment enough times where you realize that there is something to instinct and intuition. And as Dr. Charlie said, your heart neurons, that the brain outside of the brain in your head, like, I think when you see that it actually works, then you build up that reservoir of confidence that it's going to work the next time. I just think that maybe the hardest part is doing it the first one or two or three times, because I think you can get into a flow where you hyper rationalize, you hyper intellectualize, and you're never trusting your gut, you're never trusting your instinct. And the 0 to 1, I think, is the hardest part of that.
Yeah, I would say you need more than just 3 times of it working in your favor, because it's hard the more you're on this earth, to really trust your instinct in a way where you can still stay open-minded. Because if you're going to trust your instinct, then part of that kind of inherently says, I'm going to just do things my way, and that's about it. But then it's like, well, you can trust your instinct and allow an open mind to like conclude that for you. Or sometimes that open mind like opens up a new path. I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, staying open-minded while still trusting your instinct. Damn.
That's true, because sometimes instincts can conflict. If someone, their gut is telling them one thing and someone else's gut is telling them another thing, who's to say who's right in that situation?
That's why maybe it's best to be the person who says, let's try it. And then let it go to a situation where it proves itself that maybe there was another option. Right. So, but it wasn't that you said no. You just knew that it wasn't going to work, but you were like, all right, let's get like, sometimes people have to experience that something like a decision wouldn't work.
Like one of their own decisions not panning out like they thought it would.
Yeah. I think like you can get all the advice in the world, but sometimes you just have to like experience it yourself.
Totally, dude. Totally. It's so funny you say experience. I was literally looking up last night the etymology, like the root of the word experience. And wow. it was just because I was thinking, it's like, this is a word that we use all the time, and I don't even know what it originally meant. And the like 2 root suffixes are ex and peritus, and ex means out of, and peritus means trying or risking. So it's like, when you learn from experience, you learn out of trying or learn out of risking. I think that's pretty powerful. Yeah.
That's amazing. The word experience literally means out of trying or risking.
Yep. Which is what you said, right? I mean, it's like you actually have to run the experiment, which is based on the same suffixes. It's like you actually have to try it. An idea is one thing, but you put it into reality and it becomes a whole nother thing.
Wow. I love that. I love that. The change that knowing that, and then recently learning the root of empathy, empathos, in
Mm.
feeling, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is just making it more complete. Like,
Right. Yeah.
and you learn empathy through experience. Like, you're going to learn empathy by trying different ways of being empathetic, like understanding different ways of creating different spaces for people. Some might
Totally.
work, some might not. And then you realize, like, oh, that is actually a way to create a forum where people feel comfortable sharing what's on their mind and keeping open dialogue, and then thinking about like a path forward. Like, there are ways to create spaces like that. And sometimes it takes several times where all of a sudden you're not the person who's making that situation awkward. You're actually the
Mm-hmm.
person who's aiding and like helping and creating a space. And that's only because of experience and out of trying. I love it.
Yeah, right, dude. No, 100%, dude. And that's where the real like reward is. Like, you can, and I've been guilty of this myself the last year and a half with just exploring all these ideas in abstract, and with COVID, like not being around people as often as I was prior to COVID, when I was in an office setting.
No,
And
what's COVID? Kidding, kidding, kidding.
um no, I was just saying, like, it is fun learning, and it is fun reading an article about 3 new ways you can practice empathy, and it's like, oh, that makes sense, and there's something gratifying about that. But the real nectar comes in actually putting it into use and seeing it have an impact on other people, just seeing it work, seeing it become real. Like, that's the where the excitement of life is. And I think maybe I'm not the only one out there that can look back on the last couple of years and think, maybe there's some things I've been thinking about in theory that I haven't yet put into practice. And maybe that's really where the next frontier is, like making it real.
Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult. And like, I'll think, I was telling you about this earlier. I look back on some of our conversations in late 2020, early 2021. And like, we're talking about things that are basically around how you get through situations, inner outer world type of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I look back and it really sounds sometimes like so naive to
Mm-hmm.
think, to just like be talking about how, oh yeah, just like, try to bring this stuff to the workplace, like be that person who like creates the space and all that stuff. And I look back and it was said with such ease and as if it was so easy. And now I find myself in situations where it's like, okay, you're now bringing this to the table. You live this. Like, you have to, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. And then what's really interesting around that is, while we made a sacrifice to leave work, try something, you know, go on without an income for a long time, we did a lot of work on ourselves though, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, going back into a situation where you're around, people, and you're working for somebody and all this stuff, and maybe the person that you're interacting with just hasn't had the chance yet in their journey to really do hard work on themselves. And so to assume that people are where you are at, or that you are where other people are at, like, we're
Mm-hmm.
all at different levels. So like, maybe level setting, right? Like, just understanding each other a little bit more, like that we all are all humans. We all are having unique experiences. We're all trying different things. Um, and we're all at different paths in the journey, but it's all good, right? It's like, this is the best part about living. And I don't know where I was going with that, but I was, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
you lose your
No.
train of thought.
No, it makes sense to me, man. Yeah, I think where
Oh
mine.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
just the gap in where people are in their journeys, right?
Mm.
Like, so, just, that's just something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think on that topic of the gaps, I think one, so, over this last year and a half, we've had the luxury of talking with people that are using the same language as us. If like we had
Oh
like
yeah.
Dr. Hollis on talking about shadow, talking about psyche, talking about complexes. He obviously knows the underlying of these meaning of these terms way better than we do, but we're speaking the same language. And I think the real, master of these concepts knows how to bring them up with someone else who's unfamiliar with them and not rely on like the dictionary definitions. Like if someone is unfamiliar with the idea of the shadow and you're like, I think there's something in your shadow right now that you're projecting onto me, it's like that's gonna, that's
No,
gonna be a huge
yeah.
turn off for them. So it's like figuring out a way to use the wisdom that you've gathered from exploring these things, but not have to rely on the terms themselves for people that may be unfamiliar with them. That's like where the real art comes in.
That's why I'll probably refrain on any of that until I master myself first. But it
Totally,
is
dude.
interesting to, hear from like so many different people. They'll just say like, "Oh, I listened to this episode and, it impacted me." And it's like, some of these people are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And it's interesting that like, the work is hitting them now.
Hmm.
Right. So it's like, just again, think about that. Imagine. So if I was someone who was in my 20s right now, and it's like, if I have access to these types of thoughts and ideas and just what people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s are thinking about, and I can get this access in my 20s, like this is
Yeah.
huge. This is huge. This is the stuff that, the earlier you can get your mind around, the better it is, so that you're not, in your mid 30s and 40s and 52 years old and you're running a company and your inner world is just disaster because you weren't even aware that you needed to do this type of stuff because you just had your head down the whole time. Right. So I just feel like the work that we did and what we put out, I mean, it's definitely impacted me. And then the other thing is like, even knowing these things, you still find yourself sometimes just going back to old patterns.
Yeah.
And it's a constant
Yeah.
reminder that this is a tough, long game, right? Like this is something that people will probably try to master their entire life. The moment they actually realize it's something that's worth mastering. Um, yeah.
Totally, dude.
And then
Yeah.
it's like going back to the other thing around animals, because like again, what other animals are thinking about their mistakes and stuff?
Yeah. I know, dude. It's true. It is very true. Yeah, no, well, it just reminds me of something that you said with Karen Hardwick around. She was like, sometimes the universe keeps bringing you a message until you finally receive it. And then you were like, but sometimes you receive it and then you need to learn it all over again. I think you said something to that effect. It's
Yeah,
true. It's like,
yeah.
it doesn't just click once and then you're forever locked into that pattern. It's so easy to revert back, even after all this growth and time and understanding you put into yourself. It's the patterns they have a pull. They have a very strong pull. So,
It's why I wore the shirt I wore today,
oh, nice, dude. I didn't see
because
the
it's in the
double helix.
DNA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Right.
cool, dude.
Like, so like there's some things that are simply in the DNA.
Dude, 100%.
But then that
No,
goes back to James
yeah.
Hollis, right? It's like, did you show up as yourself at least
Mm.
sometimes?
Hmm. Yep. He did put that caveat on it. Yeah, for sure, dude. Yeah, just the last thing I really have to say on that topic is I'm also kind of going through this arc now where I'm trying to be more humble about. So it's like when you first start this like this kind of psychological inquiry into yourself and you're noticing, your shadow and like how your childhood maybe led you to have certain blind spots or certain complexes. And it's like, I just, it's easy to sort of have like resentment and be like, I'm not going to do, if I have kids in the future, I'm not going to do that with them. But it's like, it's important to come back to a place of humility and realize that maybe you'll be able to like rectify one piece of your childhood, like to be able to kind of stop one piece of a shadow in its tracks, and the next generation won't inherit it from you. But there will be other things, like the idea that you can raise a kid with no blind spots or complex. It's like this is part of the human condition, and like as I want to be humble about my ability to not put that into the next generation, I also want to be like humble about my own parents. It's like no one's perfect, and like I'm not a perfect person, no one is, but like I respect the fact that they did something that was really hard, which is raising
Oh,
a kid.
yeah. I
Really
mean,
hard to
come
do.
100%. So hard to do, and harder when you have less knowledge, like less access to knowledge the way that we have now. But what you're getting at is there will constantly be situations that you're going to be required to face and find yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It'll just
Mm-hmm.
always be happening, facing and finding yourself. It's like, that was Lisa's title for motherhood, but facing and finding yourself is going to happen all the time.
Totally, dude.
Yeah.
Totally, dude. Yeah, it's true. It never stops, dude. Because the world shifts around you. It's like, and yeah,
But
it's
to your
not.
point around staying
Yeah.
humble, right? It's like, again, just humble. I was talking about it earlier, just humbled about some of the things I was saying like a year and a half ago, making it seem so easy, but also humbled in terms of like going back to balancing different skills. So, wow, great. I was able to strengthen some soft skills, but now it's time to strengthen technical and operational skills. Now it's time to strengthen some other areas of me that are
Mm-hmm.
weak, which is actually kind of cool because it's like, oh, there's something to work on.
Yeah, totally, dude. I think that's where the fun is, right? If you're like, this is something I can get better at, and I'm going to be more powerful and competent as a person if I can improve in this respect, and marrying the inner and the outer. Like that was Jung's whole thing. It wasn't, it's yeah, the inner world is often underlooked, and there's a lot of interesting soil there to till and to turn over and explore. But like idea was that the inner and the outer function symbiotically, and there is no inner without the outer, vice versa. So like to your point, sorting your inner stuff out and then figuring out what you need to practically improve on in the outer world in order to live like a fulfilled, complete life, that's just as important.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I heard somebody like, I was scrolling through Instagram or whatever. I don't know who it was. I wish I could give this person credit, but it was basically a video on like the stuff that you're going through right now, like all this pain, all these feelings that you're feeling, the pit in your stomach, all that stuff. You need to go through this. Like this is part of the process because it's going to turn you into the weapon that we're supposed to be. And it's like you think about just going back to remaining humble, like when it's the hardest, man, it's also like the time to stay. This is when being humble is so important because then from here you actually become the weapon or the warrior leader comes out of these dark times. And so I think that's my own motivation to myself around like we're all going to be making mistakes, we're all going to be learning things all the time, but what type of person were you? Were you yourself, and are you going to use this as the chance to like work on the weaknesses and come out better? That's really all I can talk about in terms of like my own experience and where my mind's at right now with all that.
Totally, dude. No, yeah, that's powerful. And again, reaffirms the idea that metaphors are powerful, right? Like the weapon is an image, it's a visual. And maybe that's part of why it really resonated.
Yeah, real quick, shout out to Darrian Mikell,
Hmm.
the CEO of
Yeah,
Qualify.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, I remember that.
They
Yep.
just raised like 2.5 million.
Oh, I didn't know that. Congrats,
So
Tyrion. That's
good
awesome.
job there. But anyway, again, we had him on the pod for I think it was episode 80. And then it's cool to see that, you know, like the things that he was talking about. And it's cool to see somebody hit a milestone like that, like going out and getting some funding, like, good for him.
Yeah, totally.
Love that.
Dude.
Good vibes.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's big. He was literally talking about the experience of working with investors on the show in detail. So he was having those very conversations while he was talking with us in the piano. Like he probably left that podcast recording to go have that exact conversation. So that's cool. That's really cool. If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglatterly.com.
Thank you.